if for some reason, um, if for some reason somebody wants like a PDF of this thing, um, let me know and I can send one over for you.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do that. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started tonight.
Mm.
Going to do some discussion on livestock guardian dogs and got to work with Bill a little bit. They're from Texas A&M for our targeted grazing workshops held in Texas, and uh, just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the intricacies of livestock guardian dogs. So really appreciate you carving out some time for EAPK and hopping on here for a webinar. This is being recorded and will be posted on the website for members viewership later. And with that, Bill, again, we thank you and excited to hear what you have to talk about.
Sure. Happy to present for y'all. So, again, folks, my name is Bill Costanzo. I'm the Livestock Guardian Dog Program Specialist at the AgriLife Research Center in San Angelo, Texas. Tonight, I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the program that I started back in 2019. And so, if you have any specific questions, about guard dogs or whatever, feel free to save those and I'll get those to the end. It's usually just kind of easier if we do all the questions at the end. That way I can kind of get through all the slides. So with that, we'll get into this thing here. So, why did we start this program? Well, basically it was to, this is kind of like our technical, mission statement type of thing, but it really was to increase the understanding and use of the dogs by cooperating producers in Texas to help decrease predation and, livestock wildlife conflict through research and educational activities. And so that's kind of the broad goal of the program and what we've been doing since 2019. So what do we focus on though? And there's a lot of stuff that encompasses that kind of mission statement. And so what the program is kind of focused on, is coming up with some livestock guardian dog management or best management practices. And so the things that we've been looking at are roaming, which is obviously a big issue with guard dogs, and tracking the dogs during that process or when they're roaming, looking at proper bonding, and then feeding and just kind of overall general health care of the dogs. One thing I do want to mention is this program that I run is a joint venture between Texas A&M AgriLife and the Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board here in Texas. And so for any of those folks that are on here that, might be in Texas or see this from Texas, your checkoff money, goes to fund this program. One of the goals of the Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board is, supporting research done to producers here in Texas. And so this is one of the programs that they fund with that checkoff. If you're not familiar with the checkoff, just real quickly, it is for sheep and goats. I believe it's like 90 cents a head now. And it isn't statewide. I'm not really sure why that wasn't set up originally, but it covers roughly about a third of the state, kind of from central Texas westward, basically. It doesn't go all the way up into the panhandle. It kind of cuts off into that area, but that's kind of the general area. Central, west, and down into the southwest Texas. So a little bit about the program history. Now, the center that I work at, there's 12 or 13 of these centers spread across the state. The center in San Angelo's main focus is sheep and goats. And so, research on guard dogs has been done at the center, since the late 70s, kind of on and off as, there was a professor there that had interest in the guard dogs. They may have done some things here and there, but the most recent stuff that we have started with a donation of the Martin Ranch in Menard, Texas to us, which was in 2010. And so when we took over the ranch, it's a fairly productive ranch for Texas with a lot of grass, and so it's great for livestock. But they had a large amount of predators, and the predators were taking their toll on their lambing percentages, and so they got some llamas and they got some donkeys and they tried some shed lambing and some things like that. And while they had a little bit of success, it really wasn't over that 100% mark. And so they got guard dogs in, I believe it was 2009. And within a year, they went from 60% lamb crops to 80. And then by the second year, they were over 100. And by the third year, which I believe was 2011, they were floating around 120%. And so that kind of started, some research going on there at that ranch and was the initial start to the current program we have today. So in 2015, they started an official livestock guardian dog research program at the center. When our previous director, Dr. Redden, was hired on, they did a case study that demonstrated some livestock guardian dog efficacy, and then they were also doing some livestock guardian dog and predator interactions with another professor that was there. In 2017, they reached out to the Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board. That board committed funding for a livestock guardian dog program. And so they started the search at that point for just a research specialist because they didn't have funding for an actual professor at that point. And so I was hired on in January of 2019 to officially start that program, which I did. And so in late 2019, after doing a bunch of producer visits and some survey results stuff on our Facebook page, we decided to start a bonding project. And so that project originally was slated to run for 5 rounds or 5 years, but it's been so successful that at this point we're continuing it indefinitely, and we're just looking at different things to test with the dogs at this point. Kind of a minor thing, but it's a huge help for myself. In 2022, we hired a livestock guardian dog program assistant, and that's just a student assistant that helps me with kind of the day-to-day things of the dog. So while I used to joke that, I had the greatest job in the world because I got paid to play with puppies, I don't get to do that fun stuff as much anymore. My student assistant gets to be out there and, play with the pups and watch them grow and that kind of thing on a day-to-day basis. I just kind of oversee that stuff at this point. So, originally I was hired on as a research specialist. We had some changes based on what the predator board was wanting out of this program, and so in 2023 I switched over to a program specialist, which really didn't change my job. It just changed kind of how the funding is routed through Texas A&M. And so basically what I do on a day-to-day basis is producer assistance and education. I do a lot of stuff on the internet and social media outreach. Obviously conduct and assist in livestock guardian dog research projects that we have going on. And then I also oversee, the whole program at the 4 research ranches that we have in and around San Angelo. And so we run anywhere from 15 to 20 dogs, adult dogs. It kind of depends on the year and the research projects that we have going on. In addition to that, there's generally 6 to 8 puppies that we're bonding, and that's across about 15,000 acres. So we definitely have real world ranch issues on our ranches, like poor fencing and lots of brush and, a bunch of other things that ranchers kind of in West and Central Texas deal with. So that's basically my job duties. The producer assistance and education stuff, I do go out if a producer calls me and make in-person ranch visits. And so if you're a producer and, you're having issues, you can contact me. I will come out, kind of do a little survey with you, look at what the issues are and kind of give you depending on, the situation, sometimes it's an actual written report that I give, or other times it's just a verbal recommendations at the end of the visit. I do all kinds of county workshops in the state, out of the state, kind of all over the U.S. We put on at least one field day a year. It's kind of floated around the state, but it's going to be based out of San Angelo moving forward. We did one back in April this year. Create fact sheets. If you're looking for information on guard dogs, like, you don't have, for instance, selecting a puppy or bonding and training, you can go onto our website and there's fact sheets on that. There's information about like flea and tick medication. There's all kinds of stuff on our website at the San Angelo Center. Also put on webinars. We do those quarterly. It's generally, what is it? I think it's the middle month of each quarter, and it's usually the third Thursday at 3:00. Our next one is actually going to be in September because the presenter couldn't make it in August. But if you're looking for webinars to get more information on guard dogs, you can check out again our website, and it'll show you in the events section when those are. Social media stuff, as I mentioned earlier, we have a Facebook page, Instagram account, YouTube channel. I also write a blog. You can for on the website. So it's good stuff. Producer contact. So this is just kind of a breakdown of how I get contact from producers. And so about 46% of the contacts that I have with producers is through some sort of social media site. 28% from email, about 26% from phone or texting. And then about 50% of the people that contact me have some sort of a behavioral issue with their guard dogs. About 20% are looking for a guard dog, and about 16% have some sort of a GPS tracking type of a question. So again, there's our social media stuff. I generally have about 4 to 5 posts a week. There's program updates, helpful information that we put out. There's like a funny post that we put every Monday. I say we, it's really just me. If you're having a bad day, check out our Facebook page on Monday, and there's usually something kind of funny related to guard dogs. We've got roughly about 10,000 followers, a little bit more than that at this point. I think it's 10.6. We've got an Instagram account. That one lags behind a lot. Our clientele aren't on Instagram. So we've only got to think about 850 Instagram followers. YouTube is growing all the time. It never amazes or never ceases to amaze me, how many hours of video are watched. Back in 2022, there were about 1.3 thousand hours of videos watched. I think now it's probably, over 15 or 1,600. We've got about 2.3 thousand followers on the YouTube channel. Like I said, that's growing all the time. I mentioned I write a blog. It's called The Guardian Way. You can sign up for it on the website using that link there. I mentioned that we did some polls, and so sadly, Facebook took that ability away from businesses. I think it was in 2021 or so. So I don't do these polls anymore. But we did 42 weekly polls in 2019, and on average, we had about 102 respondents. And so some things that we asked was, what type of dogs do you have? So about 54% of people said they had a single straight bred dog. About 19% were using crossbreds. 80% use some sort of internal external parasite control, and kind of on down the list there. Why is this information helpful? Well, it was helpful for us to know what people were doing and the type of dogs and things that they had, so that we could design a program to kind of help producers out better. And so we're still working off a lot of these same things from these original polls back in 2019. So some things that we've developed and been doing based on these, this information directly from producers. We've looked at tracking dog movements, dogs and livestock movements, researching new types of GPS trackers. We've done some game camera studies, feeder improvements and feeding station design. And then, the big thing, the bonding project that we have going on currently. So the GPS tracking program, producers can reach out to me if they're interested in trying some GPS trackers for their dogs and even for their livestock, and we can provide that to you for free for a limited amount of time. Generally, we meet with producers. We can't send trackers to everybody, in the country. We do have a limited amount of these things that we can send out, but we'll generally send some out to a producer. They try them for 3 months, and if they like them, I can get them the information and how the units are set and stuff like that, and then they return them to us. But the system that we've had the most success with is the LoRa system, and that's basically that picture that you see over on the side on a pole. It was a system that was developed for the U.S. military, and now it's out for civilian use. And the easiest way to kind of like explain it to you is basically that tower system that you see right there, that gateway. It's kind of like an old school repeater, and so the trackers send information to that gateway that's on your ranch, and then that unit sends the signal to a cell tower somewhere, or wherever the closest cell tower is. The nice thing about this system is that you get almost real time information on your dogs. So we have ours set for a location every 15 minutes. So every 15 minutes, I can pull up on my phone where all of our dogs and the livestock that they're with are at on any of our ranches. We get roughly about a 4-month battery life out of that unit. They cost approximately $100, to purchase one of these things, and it's roughly about a $5 monthly fee per tracker. And then there's a single $5 fee for that LoRa gateway. The trackers take just regular AA batteries. And you can get notifications. You can set up what's called a geofence, which is kind of an imaginary boundary around your property line. And so if your dog crosses that, you'll get a notification through the app itself, text message and email, or you can, kind of depending on how you have it set up. So those are the pros to the system. Really the only con to the LoRa system is that it has about a 4 to 4.5 mile radius from that gateway that you see there on the screen. If the tracker goes past that and there's not another gateway someplace, you'll lose the dog. So if you have a large ranch, and some of the producers that I work with have very large ranches because the ground is so poor, some of them, have to set up a second or a third gateway, to cover the entire ranch. How much do the gateways cost? Because I'm sure somebody's going to ask that, so I'll just tell you now. A unit that you see like right here in the picture, that's a solar-based unit. So there's a solar panel there that you see, and then there's a battery that's inside that box. That costs roughly about $1,500 or $1,600. If you have power someplace, if you want to mount this thing like, on an old barn or some sort of a power pole or something like that, where you've got some 110 power, it drops the cost quite a bit. They're about $700 or $800 for the 110 units. So that's kind of the LoRa gateway. Like I said, we're always continually researching new GPS trackers. And so we did try out these ear tag trackers that you see down in the bottom corner there on the right-hand side. No, we didn't put them in the dog's ears. We just attached them to their collars. They worked great at first. These things are very small. They're about, I don't know, 3 inches wide, long, and inch and a half wide, and about a quarter of an inch thick. The problem became, even though the collars were weighted to keep that unit on the back of the dog's neck, the dogs would scratch And so what happened eventually, usually within about 2 months of putting these out, is that little solar panel on the very front of it would become all scarred up from the dog's toenails scratching on it, and it just wouldn't stay charged anymore. So I think these are a great unit if you're going to put them on livestock to help track livestock with them. But for guard dogs, they just didn't work well. So what do we learn from dog movements? This is pretty interesting to look at tracker patterns of the dogs. So we find out things about, different types of guarding patterns that dogs have, roaming versus patrolling patterns, where predator pressure is, and just basic, kind of behavior patterns of the dogs. So there's two pictures on the screen here. The one on the left-hand side here in the center, this is one of our younger dogs that we had, and this is something that I see. This is one of two like guarding patterns that I generally see in the dogs. So this pup was making kind of circular patterns, and so you can see there's kind of two big circles here, and then kind of a smaller one again, of another dog kind of down here in the blue. But they basically either make, kind of loops across your pasture or circles, or they make some sort of a zigzag pattern. Every dog is different. And no, I haven't seen any specific patterns, for breeds. Most of the pups that we get are generally, from the same breeder, so they're all siblings. And so, siblings, can have a different guarding pattern. So there, if you want a dog to make all circles and another one to do zigzags, and you buy two different ones, well, you could end up with two dogs that zigzag cross, or two dogs that make circles, or one of each. It just kind of depends on the dog itself. The other thing that we've noticed is when dogs are actually roaming, and I will tell you that there's a difference between patrolling outside your ranch boundary and roaming. They are two different things, although everybody just says that, well, my guard dog's roaming. Well, what we found with dogs that are roaming is this picture over on the right-hand side. So this black box that's down here at the bottom is a portion of one of our ranches. And so this was a dog that was out of our bonding project. He was in the control group, and so he didn't get any type of treatments. And so, you can see here that he kind of went across this portion of the ranch, and then he got onto the road and just started following the road. And he ended up stopping over here where the cursor is. From this ranch, the corner of the ranch boundary here, the top portion here, that was about 4.5 miles, and he had almost made it to town. Town was about another half mile. And so when the project ended, I said, well, we've got to be able to fix these dogs, that we're keeping for our own, guarding purposes on our research ranches. So that's just kind of an example of roaming. It's generally a straight line. You may see a few circles or zigzags, kind of depending on how the dog itself guards. But it's going to be traveling, predominantly in a straight line someplace. Why they roam and where they're going, I don't generally know. That's still something I'm hoping we can answer at some point in time. But if you had a tracker and you saw this kind of behavior, that dog is roaming. Okay. What do we get out of some of this tracker data? So on that same ranch, or that ranch is bigger than that black box that I just showed, but we had trackers. I believe there was 7 dogs at this point. And so we put trackers on the goats, and we put trackers on some of the dogs at that ranch. And we kept track of them for about 1.5 years. Okay, so 456 days approximately. And so this was in 2019 and 2020. And so what we found was that the dogs traveled on average, and this ranch is roughly about 5,000 acres. Okay. Those dogs travel between 4 and 12 miles a day with an average of 7 miles. Now you might say, well, why is it that important to know? Why should I know how much my dog is traveling in a day? Well, it really can help you, determine what type of dog food that you need to be feeding your dog. I try to encourage producers not to go down to Walmart and pick up a pallet of Old Roy for their guard dogs, because you really get what you pay for. And if you're not feeding your guard dog properly, you may not notice it right away, but the dog at some point, it's only going to have so much energy from that poor quality food. And so they're going to be laying around a lot more, and not up and traveling like they should be. And so, I'm not saying to go down and buy, $85 or $90 bags of Purina Pro Plan either, but buy a good quality kibble for your dog. Something that has a protein percent, probably from 22 to 24, and, a fat content from probably 17 to 20. Before you ask, and I'll tell you now, what do we feed? We feed the Diamond High Energy to our dogs, and it's a 24/20. And since we made that switch over to that, our dogs have never looked better. And we don't have thin dogs anymore for the most part, unless they're injured or sick. And they're up guarding a lot more than they used to be with the other brand of food that we were feeding them. So the other thing I want to point out about, this chart that we have here on the screen is you can see there's two lines. There's a blue line and a red line. The blue line is the distance from goats to dogs, and then the red line is dog to dog. If you notice, and it's on a 24-hour scale there, the dogs follow basically the same pattern that the goats do. And it's very similar for the sheep as well. So, we normally think of guard dogs being very active at night, but in this study, they weren't. They didn't travel very far from the livestock. Less than this is in it says miles, but I think this is actually in meters. So throughout the early morning hours, they're fairly close to the livestock. As the livestock, get up and start moving around in the morning, the dogs are doing the same thing. And then they bed down for a while the goats are ruminating. And then, after lunch, they get up and they're active again. And then, it kind of peters off again into the evening, and the process starts all over again. So while you might hear your dogs barking, an awful lot in the evening, they really aren't up moving around, away from the livestock. They're staying pretty close to the livestock all the time. If you have a good guard dog that isn't roaming, okay. So something else that we did were some game camera studies. So we did a game camera study at that same ranch in Menard in 2018. And so we wanted to know what was going into our feeding stations, because they were losing a lot of feed, and the feeding stations were getting torn up. And so, this was just for 30 days. They put out a bunch of game cameras at all the feeding stations we have. And what they found was this big blue portion of this pie chart here were feral hogs getting into our feeders. And so that's why, we were losing a lot of dog food. The feeding stations were getting torn up. The feeders were getting torn up. The dogs were only in there about 20% of the time. Okay. And then followed by coons and a bunch of birds. And then every, once in a while, some sheep were getting in there, and, possums, skunks, and some goats. We replicated that same study, but we spread it across 3 different ranches in 2023. And we spread it out for a little bit longer, just because of moving the cameras from ranch to ranch. But by making some changes in our feeding stations, and I think I've got a picture coming up here in a second, we were able to eliminate feral hogs altogether. So there's no blue in this map, and this big, orange portion is now the dogs, okay, getting in there, which is, kind of the way it should be. Coons really didn't get in here any more than they were getting in before. It's just that the pigs are not there, and so the percentages, kind of change. Same thing up here, we didn't really have birds more than we had before, just percentages changed. The one big thing that did kind of change, and it was because of, we had this one feeding station, and there were 2 foxes. I'm assuming it was a male and female pair. And they would get into the feeding station almost every single day. And so we did have foxes come up on here, and that's kind of a high percentage. And that's why, because of one station had a bunch of fox activity. the station was up close to an old cement water trough, and so the foxes would jump up on there and then jump through the opening and get inside the feeding station. So here's some examples for you. So this was an old feeding station that we had. It was just some panels that were wired together. You can see there were a ton of hogs inside this thing. And this is the design that we went to. After doing a bunch of producer visits, I would take pictures of their feeding stations, and we kind of came up with this design. This one here is not completely finished. We ended up having to put a floor into it, and then this top opening here is also closed off. It does keep out all the hogs. It keeps out the sheep. It keeps the goats out. And so this thing is roughly 4 feet by 4 feet, and then it's about 6 feet long. This is just a livestock gate, that you can purchase. You generally have to special order these because there's only 4 openings here because these spacings are evenly spaced. I believe there are 11 inches between each one of these, and I think the top one might be 12. But what we do, this one you can see has been welded on, but what we've gone to doing now is we just attach this welded wire with hose clamps. And the reason we do that is because when we're starting puppies, like in the bonding pens, we have this bottom level open and the other one's all closed off. And so that allows the puppies just to walk in. And so as the puppies grow, we close off the bottom, we open the second section. And then, as they get almost mature, we close off the bottom 2, and then this third level is what we leave open for the dogs to jump in. I generally don't like dogs digging into feeding stations because, one, I think it makes them more apt to want to go through a slide or a crawl from a predator on a fence line, which could lead to them getting trapped in a snare. And no, we haven't seen dogs more apt to want to jump over fences because they jump into a feeding station instead. So that's just kind of what we do and the feeding station that we use. We do still use some panel stations, at areas where we don't have a lot of feral hog issues. Kind of basically like at the center itself. We have very little predators there, and we don't even really have a whole lot of varmints, coons and possums and things like that at the center in San Angelo. So another study that we did was on timed feeders. And so what we did is part of that initial game camera study is we looked at self feeders versus timed feeders. And so the blue bars are self feeders, and then the red ones are a timed feeder. And so you can tell, there really isn't a difference. Basically 2 dogs got into the self feeder and 2 dogs got into the timed feeder. Where you see a big difference with the timed feeder is the amount of non-target species. So in this case, it was hogs, coons, and birds. And it really decreases the amount of feed that you lose to those animals. And so one kind of thing that we did find on a side note is that if you've got 1 to 3 dogs, a timed feeder works out really good. And I would say they're definitely worth the money. If you pencil it out long term. The problem is if you've got more than 3 dogs in a field, one of the dogs is usually going to lose out and not get enough food. Even if you have the thing dispensed multiple times throughout the day, you've got to remember that the dogs are going to follow the same pattern as the livestock. And so if livestock only go to water once a day, that means, the dog that gets there first is going to eat the majority of the food and may even, resource guard the food and keep the other dogs away from it. So we do recommend that if you've got a timed feeder, to have it set, at least 2 or 3 times a day. And if you've got more than 3 dogs, I would recommend putting in a second timed feeder, and having it probably placed 25 or 30 yards away from the initial one that you have, so that, all the dogs, when they show up, have some food to eat. So some things that we've learned, from the GPS trackers. This is just kind of a different tracker design and data that's in this picture, but make sure that you've got enough feeders to accommodate all the dogs. Okay, and we generally recommend that producers locate those at areas wherever you've got a water trough or a tank or pond or something like that. because livestock are going to go there at some point during the day. And so that allows the dogs not to have to leave the stock unguarded, and, still feed, when the livestock show up there. The other thing is some dogs are bonded so strongly with their livestock that they won't leave livestock even to go, feed themselves. And so it's really important that you've got enough, feeders at your water locations, so that the dogs have time to eat and access to eat. If you're using a regular self feeder or even a time feeder, make sure that the hopper portion has enough capacity for dog food to last until you're going to return again. A lot of our ranchers have, extremely large ranches, things 10 to 60,000 acres, and they may not get to a feeding station but once a week to refill it. So it's important to have enough capacity, to make sure that it stays filled. The other thing too is if you're going to, be able to replace feed more often, don't fill the feeder up, because the food can go bad, and it's just an attractant to pests, bugs, varmints, and all that kind of thing. So, what we've gone to doing, and I don't think I have a picture on here tonight, but I found these adhesive rulers that you can purchase on Amazon. Like, they're all rolled up, come in a little plastic cup kind of a thing, and they're very inexpensive. And if you start with a new or a very clean dog feeder on the inside, we use them. We adhere them to the inside of the feeders, and that way the guys that are out on the ranches can, kind of calculate how much food to put into the feeder each time. It is helpful to mount your feeders off the ground. Use some sort of pest strips, leftover insecticide ear tags from cattle, some 7 dust or diatomaceous earth or something like that around the outside of the feeders. By having them up off the ground and using some of that stuff, it really does keep the bugs out of the feeders. We get a couple different types of beetles here in Texas that go into the dog food, and once they're in there, the dogs won't eat the kibble, and so then we end up having to dump it. So we've been playing around with some different things. It kind of depends on the specific bug in your area, but the fly tags do work fairly well. If you'd use a sheet metal screw and put one on the lid up at the top, and then another either on each side of the feeder down by where the swinging door is that the dogs push their face on. It helps keep a lot of the bugs out of it. And I've been using diatomaceous earth on my own, for my own dogs at home, kind of testing it out, and that's worked phenomenally. You can pick up make sure it's a feed grade diatomaceous earth, and you can pick that up like at your local Tractor Supply. And a small bag of it goes a long ways. How much do I put in? I don't know. I just put, kind of depends on how much dog food I'm putting out, but kind of enough to just kind of coat each one of the kibbles fairly well. It's really not a whole bunch. I mean, it's maybe a half a cup to, I don't know, 10 pounds of dog food or so. Make sure you keep your feeders locked. There's nothing like going and opening up a dog feeder to refill it, and to find a possum in there or a coon, or we've even found skunks from time to time, and that's never a good thing in a dog feeder. So I encourage you to put a lock or a hasp or something on the top of them to keep that top door closed. And if you're building feeding stations, make sure you build them strong. If you've got an issue with feral hogs, you can keep them out if you've got a strong enough feeding station and it's enclosed all the way around. Kind of going into our bonding project a little bit. What have we been doing? So I mentioned that we started in 2019. We don't do any breeding of dogs. Sometimes I wish that we did, but at this point, we just don't have the facilities or the manpower for the program to do that. So I purchase dogs generally from Texas, but every once in a while I'll find some dogs out of state just because I'm looking for a particular breed. But we get 8-week-old pups. And what we've been looking at is testing them in pairs versus singles. And we've also looked at our other treatment has been hot wire in the bonding pens versus no hot wire in the bonding pens. And then the last thing that we've been playing around recently is doing some invisible fence training and retraining of dogs, that have been roaming. And so on the screen, it's just kind of our timeline. So we get pups, they go straight out to a pen. We vaccinate them, deworm them, ID chip them, all that good stuff. We socialize them regularly. At 6 months, they get out of the bonding pen. The dogs and livestock all get trackers on them. And then, actually, we've moved this next one here. We actually spay or neuter the dogs now about 10 months of age. That's been working out a little bit better for us. And then at that point, they also go out to cooperating producers. And then at 18 months, the producers can either purchase the dogs, or if they haven't worked out for them, they can return them. Out of 5 rounds of dogs, it's roughly 40, I think it was 43 dogs that we put out. I had my first dog returned this summer. So producers have been very happy with the results, and all of those dogs that have been put out are all still working on those same initial ranches, and the producers are extremely happy with them. So that's kind of the project as a whole. Here's some pictures of our bonding pens. So these yellow boxes over on the left are 2 of our training pastures. The one in the middle is another training pasture. But the red squares are our bonding pens. Each of these pastures is roughly about 100 acres. And so it's roughly about a mile and a half. The actual center, if it was on the map, would be way up here, kind of where the cursor is. So the only time these dogs see anybody, in these, either in the pastures when they're out or in the bonding pens, is when, we're going out to specifically train them, or, if the guys are just traveling through these pastures to go feed livestock somewhere. Between bonding pens in the same pasture, it's roughly about a quarter of a mile. And then from pasture 4A to 4C down here, this is roughly about a half a mile across here. So that's just kind of the distances. How big are the pens? So each one of our pens, as you can kind of see here in this picture, it's roughly 1 acre in size. Inside of this 1 acre pen, it's kind of difficult to tell with all the brush and the grass growing up, but there's a 60 by 60 pen kind of behind this mesquite bush, and then over here, and then it kind of comes back around to this other side of this fence here. The puppies go into this bonding pen for 1 month in that 60 by 60 enclosure. And so they're in there with 4 to 6 head of livestock. And it's generally sheep and goats. We bond to multiple species. We'll have hair sheep in there, wool sheep, meat goats, and Angora goats, because those are the 4 primary species that the producers in our area raise. And so I never know, exactly who's going to end up getting dogs, when it comes time for these things to go out. So we do rotate the livestock through every 3 to 4 weeks. It is really important that you rotate the livestock in the bonding pens, so that the dogs bond to species and not specific animals. What'll happen if you don't, rotate the animals out, is the dogs will bond to those specific animals, and everything will be great. They'll get out, they'll mature, they'll be, doing a great job guarding. And then all of a sudden, your dog will start roaming, and you won't be able to figure out why. Well, it's because at some point you're going to cull those animals, or those animals are going to die. And so if that dog is bonded to a specific group of animals, and they leave, that dog is then going to go start looking for those animals. And so you'll have a dog that was, doing a great job for you and never leaving, and all of a sudden it's wandering the countryside because it's trying to find those animals that you sold or that died. So make sure that you bond them to a species, rotate the animals out on a regular basis as you're bonding those dogs. I mentioned they're in the bonding pen, the 60 by 60 portion, for a month. After that, they move into this 1 acre portion, and they stay there until they're 6 months old. At that point, the dogs and the livestock that they're with go into the pastures that you see on the other slide, picture here on the slide, and they stay there again until they're about 10 months old, and then they go out to cooperating producers. So what breeds have we used? Like I said, we've completed 5 rounds, and we have round 6 in the training pastures right now. I've tried to have at least 1 set of purebred dogs in every round. And so round 1, we had Maremas, and then some crossbred dogs. Round 2 was all crossbred. Round 3, we had some purebred Pyrenees, and then some crossbred dogs. Round 4, we had some purebred Akbash and some crossbred mixes. Round 5, we had purebred Commodores and again some mixes. And then round 6, purebred Anatolian Shepherds and some purebred Caracachans. So I mentioned socialization. It's important to socialize your dogs. The old idea that you just put the dogs out in the field and you shouldn't socialize them, they need to just go do their job, it is not correct. You would never go and take a border collie and just throw it out in the field and give it some commands and expect the dog to know what to do. It's the same thing with a livestock guardian dog. You have to train them, you have to bond them, and you need to have them socialized. So what do we do with our dogs? We've varied this over time, but what we've kind of worked down to and what we're moving forward with is about 5 minutes of direct socialization 3 to 4 times a week. During that direct socialization, we're grooming the long-haired dogs. We're rubbing our hands all over them. We stick our fingers in their mouth. We check their eyes, their ears, nose, teeth development. We spend some time manipulating each one of their individual toes on their feet to make it easier for, clipping nails when we have to do that kind of thing. And other things that we do, we tether train all the dogs. We start out with about 2 minutes per pup twice a week, and then we increase that, by about 2 minutes each week until it reaches at least 15 minutes. Sometimes, depending on how the dogs are doing, we'll push that to 20 minutes. They also get leash trained. Again, that starts out with 2 minutes per pup twice a week. We increase it by about a minute, and then it stays at about 5 minutes until they get out of the bonding pens. And then the last thing is a truck ride once a week. Why do we do truck rides? Well, we move our dogs around a lot. And so do a lot of the producers that we work with. And so we like our dogs to be very comfortable to load into a trailer, load into a truck. If we have to move them with livestock to another pasture or another ranch, it just makes life a lot easier, if the dogs are acclimated to being in a vehicle. The same thing, if we've got to take them into a vet, if it's something, they're injured in some way that we can't handle ourselves. Again, they're used to being on a leash, they're used to traveling in a vehicle, and, it makes life easier, when you're at the vets. Total time that we spend, doing all this stuff is roughly about 15 to 20 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week. So it doesn't take a whole lot of time out of your day, even during a week to socialize your dogs. And if you continue that socialization, into adulthood, you'll have a dog that, you can call or if it sees you, will come to you in the field. And that's really the way that it should be. You shouldn't have to round up all your livestock just to, take your dog into the vet because it was gored by a pig or got into a porcupine really bad or just needs annual shots or something like that. Excuse me. So one question that I get a lot, from producers is, they're like, well, I think I over socialize my dog. And well, I do think that you can over socialize the dog and make them into a pet. We started out in round 1 with socializing the dogs about 5 days a week. And then round 2 was 4 to 5 days. Round 3 was 3 to 4 days. Round 4, we got down to 3 days a week. And what happened with those dogs is, not all 8 of them that we bonded that round, but several of the dogs, I think there was 3 in that round, became difficult to catch when they were out in the field. They weren't uncatchable, but it took me an hour to 2 hours sometimes to catch those dogs, to replace tracker batteries and check them over and things like that. And so what we recommend at this point is really 3 to 4 days a week. Socializing your dogs 3 to 4 days a week will give you a dog that is, well socialized. It's not going to bite you or bite somebody else, if they have to go and grab them out of the field. But, you don't have to spend 5 days a week doing this. The other thing I want to say is, with the dogs that were socialized 5 days a week, they didn't end up at headquarters or ranch houses any more than the dogs that were only socialized down to 3 days a week. The difference really becomes, how you react to the dogs being there at the porch. If your guard dog shows up at your back porch, you can't be nice to him. make sure you tell your wife or your kids or workers or whatever. If they see the dogs around the headquarters or around the house, they need to discipline the dogs and take them back to where they belong. The first time that you think, oh, I'm too busy, I got to get to, my kid's baseball practice or game or whatever, and you just throw the dog in the kennel with the border collies, your guardian dog is going to think of that as a reward. They're in a kennel, they've got food, they've got water, they've got shade. Somebody comes by and visits them once in a while, gives them some pets, because inevitably you're going to forget that the dog is there, and the dog is going to spend several days in the kennel. And so you're rewarding that bad behavior. And so, if you need a dog that's well socialized and you want to socialize them, more than 3 to 4 days a week, I think that's okay. But you have to discipline the dog if it shows up in an area that you don't want them to be. That's what makes the difference in folks, and why dogs stay at headquarters or stay at back porches is because they're not disciplined, as soon as that behavior happens, and they're not continually disciplined every time they show up there. So just kind of brief results out of 5 rounds of our bonding project. So this is roaming data, that's collected at 18 months of age. We collect this data at 8, 12, and 18 months of age. And so these are the 4 different kind of categories that we have. And so it's the single versus pairs, and then the hot wire versus no hot wire dogs here. So you can see that dogs that are bonded in hot wire roam. That's the red bar over here on the far left. They roam quite a bit less than dogs that are, bonded without hot wire. The same thing, with your single dogs. Single bonded dogs are roaming less than pair bonded dogs. And the one thing I didn't throw on here, which I probably should have, is kind of how the data breaks down. Is the dog that's going to roam the very least is your single bonded dog in a pen with hot wire. Okay, then it's your pair of dogs bonded in a pen with hot wire. Then it's just a single without. And basically, if you bond a pair of dogs with no hot wire, they're literally roaming. So they're traveling 3, 4, 5 miles from the ranch multiple times a week, and they generally don't return. Those dogs in that control group, we usually have to go get them and bring them back to those cooperating producers' ranches for them. So that's our recommendation at this point. Whether you need a single dog or you need a pair, really kind of comes down to what you're needing on your ranch. If you want a dog that's going to stay closer to the herd, I would bond them in hot wire as a single. If you need a couple dogs because you've lost some dogs or you're having some extra predator issues, bond them as a pair. Just make sure it's in hot wire. They will travel together because they're going to bond more with each other than the livestock, but they're more apt to go out and approach a threat than that single dog with the livestock. How do I know that information? Because there's another university that has a school farm right next to ours in San Angelo, and where our bonding and training pastures are at. And the pair of dogs, we routinely see them run up to the fence line whenever their sheep or goats or their heifers that they usually put in one of those pastures are along the fence line, where that single dog doesn't do that kind of thing. It stays with the livestock, and the tracking data shows the same thing. It's not just our visual information. When we look at the tracking data, it shows that the pair of dogs is on the fence line more, that particular fence line, where the other university has animals. So I mentioned invisible fence systems. If you're needing, you have an adult guard dog that, either wasn't bonded properly or you didn't bond them in hot wire and they are roaming or they're patrolling outside the pasture boundaries and you want to try to keep them in, I would encourage you to look at an invisible fence system of some sort. We've been using 2 different systems, both the invisible fence brand system and the more recently, the spot on fence system. Both systems kind of have some pros and cons. They're not cheap. I will say that. The invisible fence brand system, which is that blue collar that's up in the top, to have them come out and, kind of, I'll say install with, kind of air quotes, because they really don't install anything other than just, take some GPS measurements and show you some things. But that'll cost you about $3,000. Each one of those collars is roughly $900. Now, once you pay that, that's it. There's no monthly fees, and they have, I think, a 2-year warranty on the batteries and the collar. The problem with that system is that you can only put in 3 pastures for each of those collars. So for instance, if you've got 6 pastures, you would have to have, and you've got 2 dogs, you'd have to have 4 collars, because each collar is only going to be able to work on 3 pastures, and those pastures have to touch each other. That's another drawback to the system. The nice thing about the system is it has replaceable batteries, and you can see one of those there. They give you 2 for every collar. So you can always have one battery charging and another one in the collar. Once the dogs have learned the system, the batteries last about 2.5 days before you have to replace it again. We have been able to take dogs that were roaming. It was one of those dogs that I showed you earlier that had gone about 4.5 miles from the ranch. We placed those dogs in a training pasture with that system on them, and they were there for 3 months. Now, these pastures were roughly about 200 acres. We did rotate between 2 pastures back and forth every week. Dogs were with livestock, and we were able to retrain those dogs and stop them from leaving that ranch for 9 months straight. When those 2 dogs finally did leave the ranch, they left less than a quarter mile from our ranch perimeter, and they went to a pen that the neighbor had, where he was bonding and training some guard dogs of his own, and they stayed there until we came over and got them. And so did they roam frequently after that? No. From time to time, those 2 dogs would leave the ranch. How often? Once a month, once a quarter or so. It just kind of depends on them. So it did really help with those dogs. We did 2 more sets of dogs, and we were able to decrease the roaming, not quite as well as those, mainly because we had some issues with the pastures that the dogs were in. But I do think you can use an invisible fence system to retrain a guard dog and help keep them on the ranch more. Round 5 dogs that just kind of finished up this summer, we used an invisible fence system on them. So they went from hot wire in the pens to invisible fence collars in the training pastures. And so this is no way to say like you should definitely do this, but I have a feeling, the results are going to repeat again with the future rounds. Those dogs didn't roam at all, and that hasn't happened with a single set of pups yet. So using an invisible fence collar in your training pastures until your dogs are adults, I would highly encourage you to do that. I mentioned the spot-on collar, the one there at the bottom. The nice thing about the spot-on collar is they're much cheaper. Each collar is roughly about $900. It also has a built-in GPS tracker built into it. And with both of these systems, there's no buried wires or anything like that. They all work off of GPS. The nice thing about the spot-on collar is, while there is a monthly service fee if you get the tracker, enabled, you make all the changes on an app on your phone. You can see where the dog is 24 hours a day. You'll get an alert immediately if it leaves the pasture, and you'll get another alert when the dog comes back to the pasture if you didn't have to go and get it. The drawback of the spot-on system is a couple things. Battery life is really short on the current one. It's about 21 hours. Versus, about 2.5 days with the invisible fence collar. The spot-on just sent me, I don't have them in hand yet, but they've already shipped. They have a new version of this collar, and supposedly the batteries are supposed to last up to 2 days. So we'll see what happens with that. But my recommendation between the 2 systems, you can buy several of the spot-on collars, for $900 each, and go and draw your own geo fences around your pastures and things like that, and not have to cough up the $3,000 that invisible fence charges you for their collar. And the other thing too, on the invisible fence collar, you can't make any changes. You have to send that collar back to them or pay a service fee for them to come out and make changes to the boundaries. So that's just kind of some pros and cons of those 2 invisible fence systems. everybody always kind of wants to know, well, what are you doing next? So some current and future bonding projects. So round 6, I mentioned, we're out of the pens and they're in the training pastures. What we've been looking at with that round is socialization levels. So we have 6 dogs. One set of dogs we've been socializing 3 to 4 days a week. The other set of dogs has only been getting socialized 1 day a week. We're still doing the same things that we've been doing to the dogs as far as leash training, tether training, truck rides, and all that kind of thing. But we did need to actually test, go to a bare minimum. And then what we found to be the ideal amount of socialization just for research purposes. And so that's kind of the reason we're doing that round of dogs. In round 7, which will start in 25, we will be bonding 4 dogs to cattle. We have a kind of a joint project with the wildlife services and our wildlife professor at AgriLife to help protect some swift foxes that are way up in the Rita Blanca National Grasslands, which are way up in the panhandle of the state. Round 8, whether I get a grant or not, I'm going to try my best to be able to train dogs for aerial threats. We have a big issue in certain areas of the state with eagles, with black-headed buzzards, and with a Mexican raptor called a caracara. So we're going to look at coming up with some best management practices for producers to be able to train dogs for aerial threats, because it seems like dogs either kind of have that ability or they don't. And I'm not sure if it's a learned trait or if it's a genetic trait in those dogs, but hopefully we can, clarify some of that for producers. Round 9, which would be in 2027, or at least we anticipate anyway, we're going to do a study on tethering. A couple of the reasons why we tether the dogs. One, in case, we've got to work livestock. It's nice to be able to tie the dog up and not have them, go berserk and flip out and bark and chew through things and, try to get away because they don't want to be tethered. The other reason we tether is because a lot of the producers that I work with, their neighbors will still be snaring fence lines, even though they're using guard dogs. And so several dogs that we've put out that have been tether trained have been saved when they were caught in a snare on a neighbor's fence. And the producer noticed they got an alert with the GPS tracker saying that the dog was on the fence line. And so they went out and the dog hadn't pulled the snare. And so that's why we're looking at doing a tethering study, just to kind of get some actual research information and publish that. Round 10, this one, I don't know if it's going to happen or not. This is going to be a big project. I need to find a lot of money for this, but we want to acclimate dogs to deer and exotics. Hunting is huge here in the state. There's lots of different type of exotic animals that are out there, different types of antelope and deer and things like that are hunted. And so young dogs have an issue, when they see these deer or turkeys and things like that, mixing in with their sheep and goats. And so we believe that if we can acclimate the dogs as puppies to these different types of exotics, they'll be less apt to want to chase them and run them out of fields when they're actually out working. And then finally, round 11, we're going to look at trying to find some dogs that might be more aggressive towards feral hogs, because feral hogs are a huge issue here in the state. And so we're hoping to find some breeds that might be more apt to, go after the hogs and chase them off and be a little bit more aggressive towards those hogs. Some other projects that we've had going on that I've been working on for a while is a Bluetooth assisted feeding station door. So basically those LoRa trackers that I mentioned earlier, they have a Bluetooth microchip installed in them. And so the company that makes these trackers also makes I'll just call it a control box for ease. And this control box, when they put these trackers on cattle at feedlots and large dairies, it opens and closes gates to allow livestock to go different places, when needed, without humans having to push them or move them through these gates. And so what we're looking at doing, we have the hardware finally together. I just need to get it from our tracking person, our sales rep, and get it installed on a feeding station. But what'll happen is the dogs will come up to a feeding station. The control box will read the tracker. It'll open the gate. The dog will be able to go inside, feed. The dog can jump back out. and then the gate closes, and we should be able to eliminate everything but guard dogs being inside of our feeding station. Some other nice things is, we'll be able to tell, how long the dog is in the feeding station, which dogs are going in, what feeding stations they're using or they're not using. So it should give us a bunch of, great data that would be helpful, to keep the dogs fed and healthy. We did just finish up with a producer survey that we sent out. It went out through social media and email lists and things like that we had. This was back in March and April. We got 530 respondents from 44 states. And then we also got some producers from Canada and actually somebody from Austria, believe it or not, that follows our program. I wish I had some data for you, but we're still going through and analyzing all that stuff. Hopefully by before Christmas, we've been able to go through all that survey results and come up with some information for producers. But basically, what we were looking at is, trying to determine whether guard dogs are actually cost effective or not. There's been 2 previous studies done. One was about 10 years ago, and I don't remember the university offhand, but they suggested that, guard dogs are cost effective. UC Davis in California did a survey about 5 years ago, based on their Hopland research station, and I know the station fairly well. And their numbers showed that they weren't cost effective, and I really think it was based on, the location that it was done. So that's one of the reasons why that we decided to do a survey, because I routinely see producers that haven't used guard dogs, that are getting a 20, 30, 40% lamb or kid crop. And within 1 year's time of dogs, they have 100% or higher. So I truly believe that guard dogs are cost effective, at least here in Texas, if not nationwide. I did want to mention real briefly, based on one of the surveys or polls that we did on Facebook back in 2019, producers, said that they felt there was a need for a guard dog association. And so we held some meetings in late 2019, and in 2020, we officially formed a Texas Guard Dog Association. It is open to producers and guard dog breeders nationwide. We've got several people that are outside the state, Kansas. They're just kind of all over the place, but it is mainly, producers and breeders in Texas, but we do have folks out of the state, mainly because we needed a source for some more education, to broaden the reach that we have for promoting guard dogs, kind of have a formal industry voice. And one of the big things was just to try to have a single source of reputable breeders of dogs where producers could go and, try to find a dog, when they need one. So that's just kind of the Texas Guard Dog Association real briefly. And there's my contact information, folks. That's all that I have for tonight. I think I'm a little bit over on time. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, feel free to come off mute. Fantastic program update. Really appreciate it, Bill, again. And feel free to come off mute, or if you're feeling shy, drop it in the chat and we'll read those out loud and answer any questions you may have. The one question, I'll get the ball rolling on this.
Sure.
As you start to approach some of your future programming and research areas, the feral hog specifically, how do you go about? Is it a breed situation? Is it a genetic situation that you try to find a more aggressive animal to keep those feral hogs off the property?
Yeah. So initially, we're going to look at, specific breeds. The USDA did a study. It finished up a couple years ago. It was a fairly large one. They had, I think close to 100 dogs in it. Now, this was in the western states. So this was in like Washington, Oregon, Montana, I think Idaho. I think there was another state. I don't know if it was into Wyoming or maybe it was Utah, but they were looking at breeds that would take on large predators, so bears, wolves, lions. Some of those breeds that they tried, like Kangals, Crocochans, some of them definitely did do better against specific threats than others. So that's kind of what we're going to look at. I'm definitely, that feral hog one is probably going to become a multi-year project, and some of those others might too. So it might push these dates farther, but I definitely probably want to try Kangals, Central Asian Shepherds, and there may be another breed or two that we try to see if they're a little bit more aggressive than kind of your traditional white dogs. Um, we might throw some purebred Akbosh in there. There were some studies done back in the late 80s and early 90s that showed that Akbosh were a little bit more aggressive to threats, but it was mainly canine threats. So I don't know how they'll do, against feral hogs, for instance.
And is it the same approach with the avian predators as well?
Yeah, so on the avian threats, what we're looking at doing there is kind of a bunch of different training procedures. One of the professors at the center has a drone license, so we're going to harass the dogs with some drones. We're also going to purchase some hawk decoys that are kind of on a long pole that you can wave around, and they kind of fly over the area. And then another thing is I found an actual hawk decoy that is motorized, but doesn't use a propeller. It actually uses the decoy's wings actually flap, and it moves just like a real bird, and it sounds almost like a real bird flapping as it goes. It does have an actual tail like an airplane does with a vertical and a horizontal to really be able to make it turn. But and the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to get. I made contact with some actual I guess they're called falconers, so guys that have falcons for hunting, and they were more than happy to come out and harass our livestock and stuff and the dogs. So we're going to kind of use all those different things for training, and then once the dogs go out to the cooperating producers when they're kind of getting ready to graduate, we'll have the falconers come out and fly their birds over and see if how the dogs react, and kind of give them a score for that type of thing. So that's kind of the aerial threat project. I had hoped to do that in round 6, but we didn't get a grant for funding, and I don't know. I think it's since we don't have to buy a drone and one of the professors has the license and the drone now, I think we can do this fairly cheaply within our normal operating budget. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that one.
Awesome. Anybody else have any questions?
Well, I figured
Okay.
somebody'd have an adolescent guard dog issue, where they're chewing on tails or ears or something.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up. Have you ever used Dangle Stick?
Yes, I do use dangle sticks. I know some people think it's outdated and cruel and things like that to, put a drag or a yoke or a dangle stick on a dog, but I don't think so. I think those things are a lot less cruel, versus, looking at like an e-collar where you're shocking a dog constantly. None of those devices are very, they're not painful at all, or maybe like a dangle stick might be mildly painful, if it irritates their front legs, but it's definitely not like you're electrocuting the dog all the time. So yes, we do use dangle sticks, we use drags, we use yokes on the dogs, and the other thing too is, I know there's other training methods that are out there like clicker training and things like that, but the producers that we work with, while I mentioned that they're very large producers most of the time, kind of medium to large producers, they don't have a ton of staff on hand, to go out and train a guard dog all the time. So I think devices like dangle sticks and drags and yokes are a good training aid to use, because you don't have to be there to supervise the dog and to correct the bad behavior all the time. The device helps do that for you. And eventually the dogs learn, not to do that. Now, I do say that they're training devices, and you shouldn't have a 3 or 4 year old dog with a dangle stick or a drag or a yoke on or something like that. They're not meant to be permanently on the dog. Um, you know, it, if one of the devices isn't working, then you probably need to move to something different, or eventually, move to an e-collar and use them correctly, because you can shock the dog and make a well socialized dog very fearful of people, by not using an e-collar correctly. And so I use those other things first, and an e-collar for me is kind of a last resort. With a dog that's approaching maturity, usually between 18 and 24 months of age. If it's gotten to that point and the behavior hasn't been corrected or the other things haven't worked, that's kind of when I'll move to the e-collar situation.
How long do you typically leave a dangle stick on a dog?
So I generally leave any of those devices that I've mentioned for a month at a time. So I'll put a dangle stick on. I'll leave it on for 30 days. We take them off, and observe the dog's behavior. If it's corrected the problem, hey, great. If not, it goes back on for another 30 days. You know, we have not had a dog yet that's gone over 3 months of time with either a dangle stick, a drag, or a yoke. I'm sure at some point there probably will be a dog. But again, if I've tried those things and after 3 months, of taking them off for a few days and checking behavior and, then putting them back on, then I would probably move to something else. Either putting them into a pen with, several billies or rams, if they're chasing, for instance, or if they're chewing, for instance. I'll leave a dog in there for 2 or 3 weeks. They generally fix any bad behavior pretty quickly, on their own. If that's not a possibility, if you're not large enough where you've got, half a dozen rams or billies, and you can't borrow some maybe from a neighbor or something, then I would probably move to the e-collar and, kind of set the dog up purposely in a controlled environment. So in a large pen or real small pasture, something like that. And, like I said, give them the opportunity to chase something or start chewing. And as soon as they do, just have that e-collar set on high and zap them good. Usually 2 or 3 times of doing that, and that fixes the situation if it's gotten that far out of hand.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
I had a question about dogs chewing on ears.
Sure.
We had this dog in particular was actually in with a flock of rams and was a huge issue with we introduced some of our NSIP stock to this flock, and him chewing off RFID tags was a major concern. We had tried drags and kind of a dangle stick as well, but just curious if there was some suggested fixes for that.
Oh, were these like all mature rams, or were these like yearling rams? Or the reason I ask is because generally in my experience, adult rams or billies just won't tolerate a dog doing that.
Yeah, so I was surprised. We had, maybe one mature out of approximately 50 of the animals. 50 matures, and then there was 300 to 400 kind of springborn ram lambs that we had just kind of kept all together for convenience. Obviously we had the most issues with the ram lambs, and then we kind of isolated with the mature animals, but I was surprised to still see it
so it
mature.
was still happening with the mature animals even?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would probably have been a case then where I would have, if the mature animals weren't taking care of that problem for you, I would have probably, like I said earlier, I would have set the dog up. I would have put him in a pasture with the e-collar on. One important thing is if you're going to use the e-collar, the dog shouldn't know that you're there, because you don't want them to associate you with being shocked. It needs to be, they associate the bad behavior. So starting to chase, the chewing, biting, whatever. They need to associate the shock with the animal that they're trying to do that to. So the best thing is, like I was saying, if you can put them into a corral or a pasture that's close, go and hide behind your truck, or sit inside your truck or something like that from a distance where the dog assumes that you're gone, and then shock them. That way they think, hey, well, if I go over to this animal, I'm going to get shocked each time I try to do this bad behavior, and that generally helps solve the problem for you. And that would be what I would recommend in this case if it's still happening.
Thank you very.
You're welcome, sir.
Yeah, I have a question about, are you doing a commercial timed feeder, or are you guys making your own timed feeders, or?
So we had looked at, like, a while ago, making our own timed feeders, where the dog would have an RFID collar on,
Correct.
or a tag on, and when they walked up to it, it would automatically dispense for the dog a preset amount. But it became too expensive. We had done some surveys on, what people would pay for something like that, and the max was about $500 to $600. This was back in 2020. It might be a little bit more than that now, just because dog food's more. But when we had looked at doing it, each feeder was going to come in about $1,100, and so we just didn't think anybody would be willing to buy them. You can purchase timed feeders out there. There was a company, it was a small company, and they were the best ones on the market, but they've gone out of business. It was called Crossfire Feeders. You can find them every once in a while, like on Facebook Marketplace or eBay or something like that. The thing that was nice about them is they were made from a really heavy gauge galvanized steel. And the actual stuff that ran it was no different than just a normal deer feeder. But it was just the design was very heavy duty, and feral hogs and stuff couldn't tear them up. The only company that I know of right now that's making commercially that's making a dog feeder, a timed one that is going to hold up to being out in the elements and stuff like that, is a company called Lamco. It's LAMCO, and they're based here in Texas. And they have a good feeder. It's just the Crossfire one was better. The Lamco one holds up pretty well to feral hogs, but they can dent it sometimes. Sometimes you got to take a rubber mallet to it in different spots and kind of bend them back out if the pigs get to them. But I don't know what theirs cost. They have two different versions. Both of them there's two time feeders. One that just runs off a regular, a deer feeder battery. And then the other one that they have has a little square solar panel on the side. And that would be the one if I was going to purchase one, because it just helps keep the battery charged.
Right.
But like I said, the company is called Lamco, LAMCO. And, they've got distributors and stuff like that you can contact to purchase one of those.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think people, I sat here and watched your other slide at the very beginning about all the different creatures that are eating from your dog feeder. And I'm sitting here thinking, man, the squirrels, where am I got these advantage feeders for sheep, I got the fattest squirrels anywhere. And I got thinking, man, I bet I got the biggest dang coons too,
Yeah, it's tough. I know a lot of people ask me about, well, should I hand feed or use a self feeder, or, again, there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah, sometimes your labor is the most valuable part of all of this.
Yeah. And that's what I try to tell folks is, if you're, sort of absentee landowner, or you're just such large of an operation that you can't get around and see all the dogs on a regular basis, then you've kind of got, you kind of have to go to a self feeder for them. But by doing that, you're creating a food source for every varmint in the countryside. And so that's why we're trying to develop some sort of an automated gate to be able to go in and out of the feeding station. We had looked at doing the feeders themselves. And I actually have a test feeder from a guy here in Texas that's working on one of these things. But the problem with the RFID system itself is, yeah, you can find all these pet feeders online that use RFID technology, but they're all made out of plastic. And the reason that they're made out of plastic is because it's what's called a passive RFID system. That there's really no amount of power other than just what a battery needs to provide to make that thing function. As soon as you go to a metal feeder of some sort, a passive RFID system doesn't work. The metal interferes with the signal, and you literally then have to take the RFID tag and touch the feeder itself before it's going to open. And what we found in testing with the dogs is the dog would never get close enough because the collar, the tag is on the collar. It would never be close enough to the feeder to actually activate the opening and allow the dog to go into it. So if that's the case, then you have to move into what's called an active RFID system. And those systems take large amounts of, I say large amounts of power, but it's basically 110 power is what you've got to go to, or a very large solar panel and a set of, deep cycle batteries that are provide enough charge to, make that system work, where the tag doesn't have to almost make contact, with the reader portion.
Yeah, so I'm in the trucking business, and I was sitting here thinking we got RFID readers on our valve stems on every tire on our truck and trailer. And when a truck makes connection to a trailer, it recognizes the trailer, but there is no power to that valve stem whatsoever.
Well, it would have to be a passive. Well, I don't know if it would be a passive system or not.
We mount a control box up underneath the trailer. And when the truck and trailer make the electrical connection, then it gets power from that auxiliary power or 7-way plug. But the actual tire pressure and the temperature coming from the tire valve stem, they don't have it. It must be like lifetime battery deal or something.
Well, it could be, or that when you make that connection, it's sending out a signal from that control box, because it's getting power from your truck system is likely what's happening. But kind of long story short, that's why we've gone to just looking at a gate system, and still having the feeder enclosed in some sort of a pen per se.
Okay, so you're doing the feeder and the pen in no time at all now.
Yeah, so we don't use timed feeders anymore at all.
Okay.
Mainly because we were running so many dogs. That one ranch that I talked about in Menard, we generally have about 7 dogs there. And the other ranches, we have anywhere from 4 to 6 as well. And so it just, the dogs weren't doing well with the timed feeders. And so the pigs were tearing them up too. Even with the crossfire feeders, they weren't usually damaging the feeder itself, but they would knock it over and then it wouldn't dispense food. And we ended up still having to put them inside of a feeding station of some sort.
Right.
And so it was cheaper to use the self feeders, just the standard ones that you buy, and build a good pen around it and allow the dogs to get in that way. That's what we came down for our specific ranches, but.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate it, Bill. And again, hope to have you on to talk about maybe more in depth some of the research areas that you guys are exploring, and definitely further in the future as more data gets cranked out on these new endeavors. So really appreciate it. Really good content, good questions, and everybody have a good night.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. If you're looking for, some more presentation on specific stuff like adolescent issues or just, bonding and training, I'd be happy to do a workshop like that for y'all. So,
Awesome. We'll definitely take you up on it. So
Careful what
Happy
have
you
a good evening, and
yeah.
we appreciate it.
Well, anything else, anybody, real quick before I hop off? Okay, well, fair enough. Well, hey, thank you, folks. If you need anything, feel free to reach out to me at the AgriLife Center in San Angelo. You can find me on there with my phone number and email and all that good stuff. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time and hope you have a good evening.
too. Thanks.